Daniel Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Louisville Cardinals, team that went 6-7 overall in the 2021 season. For all this team being 2022 and whether or not Louisville's a potential ACC dark horse going into this season is what we go over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with their team trends. Louisville 6-7 last season, 3-3 in their first 6 games, 3-4 in their last 7. So I mean, Louisville last season, this team was talented. They certainly were a talented roster, but in the end, they kind of fell back in the ACC due to a few really close losses, a few tough losses on their schedule. And I mean, in general, it's also a tough schedule for this team. They had to play 2 SEC teams, 2 of which, I mean, both Ole Miss and Kentucky, and both of those teams out of the SEC were 2 of the better teams in the conference last season. So I mean, this was definitely, I'd say, one of the toughest schedules in the ACC, if not the toughest. I mean, considering you also had to play NC State on the road, Wake Forest on the road, Clemson as well later on. I mean, it was a brutal schedule for Louisville, and this team, they went 6-7, but I mean, talent-wise, I feel like this team was definitely capable of getting 8 to 9 wins last season. But they lost to Ole Miss 24-43 in Week 1, beat Florida State on the road 31-23, lost to Wake Forest in a close one. Once again, they had a couple of really close, tough losses there. 34-37 against a really good Wake Forest team. Beat Syracuse 41-3, lost to Kentucky 21-52, and they played Air Force in the First Responder Bowl. Took the loss there 28-31, which definitely winnable game there against Air Force, but the Falcons were not a bad team last season, and they ended up beating Louisville in the end. But I mean, yeah, once again, just a brutal schedule. I mean, if you also look at their non-conference, games, you'll see why I'm saying this is such a tough schedule. I mean, you got Ole Miss and Kentucky, of course, first off, but you also had to play UCF, which UCF is, they're not an easy Group of 5 team to play. And you also had Eastern Kentucky, who's an FCS opponent, which you took care of. But otherwise, yeah, just a tough schedule for this team last season. Looking forward to 2022 now. Your roster preview going into next season. Malik Cunningham's coming back, the starting quarterback for this team last season, which he shows. I mean, he had a good season last year, 2,900 yards, nearly 3,000, with 19 touchdowns, 6 picks, and a 62% completion rate. So, I mean, his stats weren't outstanding, but I mean, over the past 3 years, since 2019, he's been the primary starting quarterback for this team, and he really, I mean, he's played decently well. I mean, especially back in 2019, we really saw his potential. I mean, he had a 22-5 touchdown interception ratio, which is really good. 2020 wasn't quite as good, but then 2021, not a bad season. So going into his 5th season with Louisville, and this will be his 4th season as the primary starting quarterback for this team. I mean, the expectations, I mean, they're not terribly high. So I mean, I feel like he's a quarterback that can he's kind of a dark horse. He can come out and surprise some people. And you also got to consider too, I mean, he is a major dual threat quarterback. He can run the ball extremely well. Over 1,000 yards on the ground last season and 20 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty insane to see out of a quarterback. So it's not just his passing. I mean, his passing stats weren't even all that bad. I mean, they're not outstanding, but they're not bad. And you got to take into account he's a huge rusher too, and with over 1,000 yards, I mean, that's just huge. So yeah, Malik Cunningham, he's a quarterback that I like a lot going into next season. I definitely think he shows a lot of potential, especially considering, I mean, he's got the experience now, and this could be his year. Yeah, but looking at the backfield, Jalen Mitchell's coming back, Trevion Cooley's coming back, so your backfield looks really good. Mitchell, of course, over 800 yards last season. Cooley over 600, so the backfield looks really good. The receiving core also looks really good. I mean, you got your top and receiving tight end Marshawn Ford coming back, but you do lose your top 2 wideouts, Jordan Watkins and Tyler Harrell. So you do lose those 2, but Amari Huggins Bruce is coming back, your 3rd wideout. So having your top and receiving, that tight end there in Ford, as well as your 3rd wideout, I'm really not too concerned about the receiving core there. Despite, I mean, it would be huge to have Watkins and Harrell back. There's no doubt. It's just unfortunate that they both transferred. I mean, they're both still eligible, obviously, but you just lost them to the transfer portal. But otherwise, it looks pretty good. You lose 1 on the offensive line, so the offensive line has got room to improve. Defensively, you lose 3 starters, 1 on the defensive line, 1 linebacker, and 1 in the secondary. So I mean, things look pretty good for Louisville going into next season. I feel like this is a team that not many people are talking about, but I mean, this team should be getting more attention. They've got Cunningham, who's an experienced quarterback who's only getting better. And I mean, as a rusher, he is just a very dangerous quarterback. Backfield looks really good. I mean, I like how this team looks going into next season. It's just a matter of if they can win those close games and pull a couple of upsets. And I mean, this could be the best season for Louisville that we've seen in a while. I mean, this team has been, I mean, they haven't been bad by any means. I mean, they were 6-7 last year. 2020 was kind of a disappointment. Got 8 wins in 2019. And I mean, they were really good in 2016. That was the last season that we really saw this team as a major contender. But potentially this team gets right back up to that 8-9 win range this season. It's very possible considering, you know, the talent that this team has got returning. So I do think this team is an ACC dark horse. I mean, they could definitely come out of nowhere and have a really good season here. But looking at your transfer portal and recruiting now, you do lose a few players in the transfer portal, but you also bring in a few key players from different teams. Jermaine Lowell, defensive lineman's coming in from Arizona State. You do lose Harrell, once again, that receiver is off to Alabama. You bring in Jarvis Brownlee Jr., defensive back from Florida State. Quincy Riley, Jaden Williams, both coming in, defensive backs from different schools. Tyler Hudson, he is coming in from Central Arkansas. Greedy Vance, defensive back, he's off to Florida State. And Jadarian Boykin is off to Middle Tennessee. Otherwise, Zay Peterson, linebacker, he is off to Middle Tennessee. And you also lose Justin Marshall to Buffalo, receiver. MJ Griffin, safety, he's coming from Temple. You also you lose Watkins. We mentioned him earlier as, of course, the top wideout for this team last season. He's off to Ole Miss. Bring in Tion Evans, running back from Tennessee. He could be a key player. Hassan Hall, he's off to Georgia Tech. D. Wiggins, he's coming in from Miami. And Nick Okeke, linebacker, is going off to Southern Illinois. Recruiting wise, 51st in the nation, 7th in the ACC. It's really not too terrible. 4 4-stars coming in, and then 12 3-stars. But that's it. Let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You got 2 road games to start off the season there. You got on the road to Syracuse and then UCF the next week, which definitely is very unusual to see a Power 5 team having 2 road games to start off the season there, and it's definitely not ideal either. I mean, you don't have a home game until week 3, and certainly if you slip up and lose to Syracuse there, that doesn't put you in a good place, especially at the start of the season, to go to UCF, and you could start off the season 0-2, which is obviously your worst case scenario. I mean, this team in September in general is just super weird. You got to go on the road for your first 2 weeks, and you got 2 Friday games too. I mean, that UCF game is on a Friday, Florida State's on a Friday, so I mean, it's pretty unusual for this team. But I mean, if you can get past September 4-0, which this team is very able to do, so I mean, your September isn't that difficult. It's just the road games and the days of games, which is kind of a weird setup. But I mean, if you can get out of September undefeated, you're in a really good spot, I think, going into an October, which is much more difficult than your first month of action, with Boston College, Virginia both on the road, Pitt at home, and then Wake Forest at home. You got James Madison in November to start off the month, then Clemson on the road, NC State at home, and then Kentucky on the road. Finish out your season. So it's a difficult schedule once again. I mean, this team, it was tough for last year, I feel like, with having to play both Ole Miss and Kentucky. And thing is, usually Ole Miss and Kentucky are kind of middle of the road teams in the SEC, but it turns out they were literally 2 of the top teams in the conference last year. I mean, and so yeah, it just made the schedule so much more difficult for Louisville having to play both of them. And so this year you only got to play Kentucky, of course, your rival, to finish out the season. Don't have to play Ole Miss, which is good news, but still, I mean, it's not a terribly easy schedule. Definitely one of the tougher ones in the ACC. Looking at September, your Syracuse on the road. I do think that you go through September 4-0. There is a chance that you slip up against either Syracuse or UCF, though. I wouldn't be surprised if you lost one of those games, but you're in really good shape if you win both of them. And then you got Florida State. I'll put that game in a close scenario as well, but you do win that one. So I think all of your first 3 games are pretty close, but you do end up beating all 3 of them, and then you beat South Florida by 2 or 3 touchdowns to finish out September. So you're 4-0 heading into October, which October is a much tougher month. Boston College, I mean, all 4 of these teams could be pretty good next year. I mean, Boston College, don't want to sleep on them. Virginia could potentially win the Coastal Division. They're probably my favorite to win that Coastal Division. And then you got Pitt, Wake Forest, 2 teams that should still be good. I think you go 2-2 in October. You lose to Boston College and Virginia, your 2 road games. And then you come back home, you beat Pitt, and then you beat Wake Forest. Wake Forest especially, I could see 9 to 10 wins once again next year. Pitt potentially 8 to 9. Virginia, once again, I wouldn't sleep on the Cavaliers next season. I feel like that's a team that's kind of being slept on a bit, and they could be good next year. So 6-2 is what I've got for Louisville going into November. I think honestly this team should have 5 or 6 wins going into November, or else it could be a tough ending, because I mean Clemson, NC State, and Kentucky, those 3 games are going to be brutal back to back to back. So looking at November here, James Madison, easy win. Clemson on the road, I do think you lose to them. It's a tough place to play, and Clemson should be even better next season. NC State, close one, but you get the win against them, which would be a huge win. NC State, I could see them 9 to 10 wins next season, maybe even 11. I mean, if all goes right for them, they should be definitely one of the better teams in the conference. And then Kentucky on the road, going to favor the Wildcats there. It's a road game. Kentucky's once again going to be good next season. I could see them as one of the top teams in the SEC, 9 to 10 wins. So not an easy schedule. I've got you guys at 8-4, which is definitely, I'd say, pretty optimistic. 8-4 is definitely reasonable for this team, and I feel like once again this is a team that's being slept on a bit. They've got some great talent coming back. Malik Cunningham in particular I really like, and we'll see if he can get even better going into next season. So I mean, yeah, the Cardinals, not a team to sleep on going into next year. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Louisville, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.